According to the Book of Enoch, civilization did not discover its most dangerous secrets. It was taught them. The teachers were not kings, priests, or wandering philosophers. They were beings called watchers, celestial figures assigned to observe humanity from a distance. Yet they crossed that boundary, descended to earth, and revealed knowledge that ancient tradition considered forbidden. They taught humans how to forge weapons from metal, how to read the movements of the stars, how to prepare enchantments, decorate the body, and manipulate the natural world. Then, the text claims, human society began to collapse. But who actually led this exchange? Was it Semjaza? The commander who organized the descent? Was it Azazel, the figure later blamed for weapons and corruption? Or does the manuscript preserve several competing memories of the same ancient disaster? Historians still debate whether these passages describe fallen angels, foreign teachers, priestly rivals, or symbolic warnings about technological power. Before this investigation ends, 3 discoveries will emerge: the identity of the forbidden instructors, the knowledge each one allegedly revealed, and the overlooked detail that changes who may have been responsible. The story begins in a landscape of cold stone and immense distance. Mount Hermon rises above the northern edge of ancient Israel, near the borders of modern Lebanon and Syria. Snow covers its upper slopes in winter. Winds move through cedar forests and exposed ridges. From its summit, the Jordan Valley seems far below, divided by shadow, water, and pale desert light. According to the Book of Enoch, this was where the Watchers descended. The text names their leader as Semjaza. He does not begin with a command. He begins with fear. Semjaza tells the others that he suspects they will abandon him after the deed is done. He worries that he alone will carry the punishment. The Watchers respond by making an oath. They bind themselves together under a shared curse. Only then do they descend. The setting matters. Hermon was not an arbitrary mountain. Its name was associated with the idea of devotion or something placed under a ban. In later biblical tradition, high places often became meeting points between heaven and earth. Mountains were where divine law was received, where altars were built, and where dangerous encounters occurred. But here, the movement is reversed. Human beings do not climb upward seeking revelation. The heavenly beings come down. Ancient text. The Book of Enoch says that 200 watchers descended in the days of Jared. It then provides the names of 20 leaders, including Semjaza, Arakiba, Ramiel, Kokabiel, Tamiel, Ramiel, and others preserved with different spellings across manuscripts and translations. That list feels almost administrative. The text is not describing a vague swarm of spirits. It attempts to identify commanders, divisions, and individual responsibilities. Why would an ancient author preserve so many names? Perhaps the names gave authority to an inherited tradition. Perhaps they represented older celestial figures absorbed into Jewish literature. Or perhaps the list was meant to transform a general warning into a detailed indictment. But that was only the beginning. After descending, the Watchers take human wives. Their unions produce violent offspring, commonly called giants in English translations. These beings consume the food of humanity, then animals, and finally turn against human beings themselves. The earth becomes filled with blood. Yet the physical violence is only one part of the crisis. The Watchers also become teachers. And this is where the story changes from a tale of monstrous offspring into something more unsettling. The manuscript assigns different branches of knowledge to different beings. Azazel teaches men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He reveals the working of metals and the extraction of materials from the earth. He also teaches bracelets, ornaments, cosmetics, and the use of precious stones. The list is unusual. Weapons and beauty appear beside one another. At first, they seem unrelated. One transforms the battlefield. The other transforms appearance. But in the moral world of Enoch, both alter human society through artificial power. Metal allows the body to kill more efficiently. Cosmetics allow the face to communicate something nature did not provide. The text treats both as techniques of transformation. Most readers stop at the weapons, but the next details are rarely discussed. Semjaza teaches enchantments and the cutting of roots. Armaros teaches the resolving of enchantments. Barakiel teaches astrology. Kokabiel teaches the constellations. Ezekiel teaches the knowledge of clouds. Arakiel teaches the signs of the earth. Shamsiel teaches the signs of the sun. Sariel teaches the course of the moon. This is not random knowledge. It forms a map of the ancient world. Plants could heal or poison. Clouds could predict rain. The moon governed calendars. The stars guided travel and ritual. Metal-shaped weapons, tools, wealth, and political power. Historical evidence. These subjects were already important across the ancient Near East. Mesopotamian scholars recorded celestial movements on clay tablets. Egyptian specialists worked with medicine, minerals, cosmetics, and ritual formulas. Metalworkers guarded practical techniques that could transform copper, tin, iron, and precious ores. The Book of Enoch did not invent these fields. It placed them inside a moral story. Knowledge itself becomes evidence of a broken boundary. The Watchers reveal things before humanity is ready to use them properly. That distinction is essential. The text does not condemn every form of wisdom. Other sections of Enoch describe the movements of the sun, moon, winds, and stars in extraordinary detail. The narrator, Enoch, is allowed to see the structure of the cosmos. So, why is his knowledge permitted while theirs is forbidden? The difference appears to involve authority, timing, and purpose. Enoch receives revelation under divine supervision. The Watchers disclose secrets without permission. One form of knowledge supports cosmic order. The other accelerates violence, manipulation, and disorder. Mainstream scholarly view. Many scholars read this account as an ancient explanation for the origin of evil practices, instead of blaming corruption only on human weakness. The story connects certain forms of destructive knowledge to a primordial rebellion. It resembles what scholars call an ideological myth, a story that explains how a troubling feature of the present world began. Why do humans possess the skill to create weapons that destroy entire communities? Why can sacred knowledge be used for manipulation? Why does technical progress often arrive beside social violence? Enoch answers through the Watchers. They taught us, but the evidence becomes more complicated. The Book of Enoch was not written as a single document at one moment. It is a collection of works composed and edited over time. The section describing the Watchers is usually called the Book of the Watchers, covering roughly chapters 1 through 36. Within that section, scholars detect overlapping traditions. In one strand, Semjaza appears central. He organizes the oath, leads the descent, and becomes associated with enchantments. In another, Azazel carries the heaviest blame. He teaches weapons and adornment, corrupts the earth, and later receives a distinct punishment. This difference may preserve more than one version of the rebellion. One tradition remembered a collective transgression led by Semjaza. Another focused on Azazel as the source of civilization's violent arts. Possible interpretation? The Watchers may represent anxieties about foreign knowledge entering Jewish society. They may symbolize elite specialists who controlled astronomy, healing, metallurgy, or ritual practices. Some researchers have also compared them with older Mesopotamian traditions about divine or semi-divine sages who brought civilization to humanity. The comparison is intriguing, but it does not prove direct identity. In Mesopotamian stories, supernatural teachers can appear as benefactors. In Enoch, the gift becomes contamination. The same idea has been morally reversed. Civilization is no longer simply a triumph. It carries a hidden cost. The sound of hammers striking metal becomes the sound of approaching war. The observation of stars becomes a method of unauthorized divination. The gathering of roots moves from medicine toward enchantment. Human intelligence expands, yet moral restraint does not grow with it. And then the text introduces its darkest claim. The Watchers do not merely teach isolated techniques. Their instruction changes the condition of the entire earth. Violence spreads, social boundaries fail. The natural order is disturbed. Human cries rise upward. And the archangels begin to notice. The lessons have become evidence in a celestial trial. But one question remains unresolved. If Semjaza led the descent, why does Azazel receive the most specific accusation? The answer lies in a detail hidden between different manuscript traditions, and it changes the identity of the rebellion's true architect. The apparent contradiction begins with two names. Semjaza leads the descent. Azazel receives the blame. At first, this seems like a simple division of responsibility. One organizes the rebellion, the other introduces its most destructive teachings. But the surviving text suggests something more complicated. The Book of the Watchers contains traditions that were probably combined during its formation. In the Semjaza tradition, the central crime is crossing the boundary between heaven and earth. The Watchers desire human women, swear an oath, descend together, and produce violent offspring. Their forbidden lessons follow that original violation. In the Azazel tradition, the focus shifts. The crisis is no longer only the descent of heavenly beings. It is the spread of technologies that transform human society. Azazel teaches the manufacture of swords, knives, shields, and armor. He reveals ornaments, precious stones, and methods of altering appearance. The result, according to the text, is corruption across the earth. Then the heavenly judgment is announced. The archangel Raphael is commanded to bind Azazel. He is cast into a jagged desert place called Dudael, covered in darkness, and held there until the final judgment. The punishment is strikingly specific. Semjaza helped organize 200 watchers, yet Azazel is isolated, buried beneath rough stones, and treated as though his instruction carried a unique weight. Why? One answer may lie in the kind of knowledge he revealed. Semjaza's enchantments were secret practices. Azazel's metalworking could reshape entire societies. A ritual might affect one person or household. A new weapon could alter the balance between cities, armies, and kingdoms. Once the technique spread, it could not easily be recalled. But another manuscript detail changes the question again. The Aramaic fragments of Enoch, discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, confirm that the Watchers' tradition circulated in Jewish communities centuries before the surviving medieval Ethiopic manuscripts. These fragments preserve portions of the names, teachings, and judgment scenes. They show that Azazel was not a late Christian invention. His role belonged to an early Jewish form of the story. Yet translations do not always present his name identically. Forms such as Asael and Azazel appear in different textual traditions. The variation may reflect transmission between Aramaic, Greek, and Ethiopic copies. That matters because Azazel was already a mysterious name in Leviticus during the Day of Atonement ritual. One goat was offered to the Lord. Another was sent into the wilderness for Azazel, carrying the community's sins away from the camp. The biblical passage does not clearly explain whether Azazel is a place, a wilderness being, or a symbolic destination. Enoch appears to give the name a face. Now the wilderness receives a prisoner. Now corruption has an instructor. Now the burden carried away from society is connected with the being accused of teaching humanity violence. Mainstream scholars do not agree that both traditions describe exactly the same figure, nor do they agree on whether Enoch deliberately interpreted the ritual in Leviticus. But the connection is difficult to ignore. Semjaza may have opened the boundary. Azazel may have made the consequences permanent. The rebellion, then, had two architects. One persuaded the Watchers to descend, the other ensured that their knowledge remained after they were gone. And that raises the larger question. Were these teachings merely imagined as supernatural secrets? Or did the story reflect ancient fears about real technologies spreading across the human world? To understand why the Watcher's story endured, we must leave Mount Hermon and enter the workshops, observatories, and archives of the ancient world. The first comparison begins with metal. Across the Near East, metalworking was never a simple craft. It required rare materials, controlled heat, specialized tools, and knowledge passed through trained communities. Copper had to be mined and smelted. Bronze required combining copper with tin. Iron demanded even higher temperatures and more difficult techniques. A finished blade concealed an entire chain of expertise. Ore came from distant mountains. Fuel came from forests. Furnaces had to breathe at the correct temperature. Hammering, cooling, and sharpening required experience. To an ordinary observer, the transformation could appear almost unnatural. Dark stone entered fire. A shining weapon emerged. Some researchers have noted that ancient metalworkers were sometimes viewed with a mixture of respect and suspicion. They controlled processes that most people could not see or reproduce. Their knowledge could create farming tools, ritual objects, ornaments, or instruments of war. This has led a few scholars to compare Azazel's instruction with ancient anxiety about technological specialization. The similarity is intriguing. Although no consensus exists, archaeology confirms that metallurgy gradually transformed warfare and social organization. It does not confirm that supernatural beings introduced it. The Book of Enoch provides a moral explanation, not a technical history. But the next detail is rarely discussed. Azazel teaches both weapons and decoration. Ancient cosmetics were not merely instruments of vanity. In Egypt and the wider Near East, eye paint could signal status, ritual identity, beauty, or protection. Pigments were produced from minerals. Oils and powders required preparation. Jewelry displayed access to trade routes and skilled labor. The Enochic author places these objects beside armor and blades because both involve surfaces. One protects the body, the other changes how the body is seen. Possible interpretation. The passage may reflect distrust of practices that concealed reality. Armor conceals vulnerability. Cosmetics conceal age, exhaustion, or social condition. Ornament converts mined material into visible prestige. The text may be criticizing deception, luxury, sexual attraction, or the unequal power created by specialized crafts. Yet this remains interpretation. The manuscript itself does not provide a philosophical essay. It gives a list and then describes corruption. Another comparison concerns the sky. The Watchers teach constellations, the signs of the sun, the course of the moon, and the behavior of clouds. Modern readers may hear the word astronomy and imagine telescopes, mathematical models, and scientific institutions. The ancient setting was different. Celestial observation governed calendars, agriculture, festivals, navigation, and royal decisions. Mesopotamian scribes recorded eclipses, planetary movements, and unusual atmospheric events over long periods. These observations were systematic, but they were often connected with divination. A lunar eclipse might be treated as a warning for a king. A planet's position could be interpreted as a sign of war, famine, or dynastic change. This is where historians disagree. The Book of Enoch contains extensive cosmological material of its own. Its authors were deeply interested in the orderly movements of heavenly bodies. They did not reject observation of the sky. They objected to knowledge used outside the proper sacred framework, That difference resembles the contrast between Enoch and the Watchers. Enoch is guided through the heavens. The rebellious teachers distribute secrets without authorization. Knowledge is not condemned because it is complex. It becomes dangerous when separated from moral limits. The next connection moves beneath the sky and into the soil. Semjaza teaches enchantments and the cutting of roots. Plants were central to ancient medicine. Egyptian papyri, Mesopotamian tablets, and later Greek medical writings preserve remedies involving roots, bark, seeds, oils, wine, and animal substances. Some treatments had practical effects. Others were combined with spoken formulas and ritual actions. Ancient people did not always divide medicine, religion, and magic into separate categories. A healer might diagnose symptoms, prepare a plant mixture, invoke a protective being, and recite words over the patient. Modern anthropology has shown that specialist knowledge often carries social power. The person who knows which root heals, which plant poisons, and which ritual calms fear occupies a privileged position. Some researchers have therefore read The Watchers as a story about restricted knowledge escaping elite control. Others see the opposite. The story may defend priestly authority by portraying rival forms of ritual expertise as corrupt. No single explanation has persuaded every scholar. And then there is the wider mythology. Mesopotamian traditions describe beings known as Apkallu, ancient sages associated with wisdom before the Great Flood. In some texts, they bring arts, rituals, and civilized knowledge. Later traditions sometimes connect them with human teachers or with figures whose status became morally ambiguous. Scholars have compared these sages with the Watchers because both belong to primeval history and both stand near the boundary between divine and human knowledge. The similarities are real. The differences are equally important. The Mesopotamian sages often support civilization. The Watchers damage it. One tradition celebrates heavenly instruction. The other asks whether certain gifts should ever have been given. This does not prove that the Book of Enoch copied a single Mesopotamian story. Ancient ideas traveled through conquest, trade, exile, translation, and shared cultural memory. Motifs could be borrowed, reversed, or transformed. The Watchers' tradition may be one such reversal. The bringers of civilization become defendants. The teachers become corruptors. The gifts become evidence. Modern technology makes the story feel familiar. But that familiarity must be handled carefully. Nuclear physics, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and digital surveillance all raise questions about whether technical ability can outpace ethical judgment. The Book of Enoch did not predict these developments. It emerged from a very different world. Yet it preserves an enduring problem. Who is responsible when knowledge causes harm? The teacher who reveals it, the ruler who controls it, the craftsman who applies it, or the society that chooses how it will be used? Enoch's answer appears severe. Some knowledge carries responsibility from the moment it is disclosed. But archaeology cannot tell us whether the Watchers were remembered as literal beings, symbolic figures, foreign specialists, or mythological explanations for social change. The evidence leads only so far. To understand why their story nearly disappeared from Western memory, we must follow the manuscript itself through rejection, preservation, and rediscovery. The disappearance of Enoch was not a single event. There was no secret council where every copy was gathered and destroyed. The history is slower, less dramatic, and more revealing. Different religious communities made different decisions about which writings carried authority. The Book of Enoch circulated widely in ancient Judaism. Portions of its Aramaic text were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, copied between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century AD. The number of surviving fragments suggests that the work was known and valued within that community. Its ideas also entered early Christianity. The New Testament letter of Jude preserves language closely connected with Enoch's prophecy of divine judgment. Early Christian writers, such as Tertullian, treated the book with respect. Others knew its traditions even when they questioned its status. But recognition was never universal. Ancient Jewish communities did not preserve Enoch within the Hebrew biblical canon. Rabbinic traditions developed around other authoritative texts. The Watcher's story remained influential. Yet the book itself gradually moved outside the central stream of Jewish scripture. Christian communities faced a similar problem. Enoch was popular, ancient, and connected with biblical figures. But it also contained elaborate journeys through heaven, named rebellious angels, unusual calendars, and cosmological descriptions that did not always fit later theological systems. Its claim to authorship created another difficulty. The text presents its revelations through Enoch, the patriarch from Genesis who lived before the flood. Yet its surviving sections were composed much later, probably by several authors over generations. For readers who expected direct authorship by the biblical Enoch, this became increasingly difficult to defend. Mainstream scholarly view. The book was not removed from one universally accepted Bible. Rather, it failed to become canonical in most Jewish and Christian traditions, as those traditions developed their separate collections of scripture. That distinction matters. A text can be respected without being scripture. It can influence theology without being read in public worship. It can survive in quotations while the complete work disappears. In the Greek and Latin-speaking churches, Enoch gradually became harder to obtain. Copies were lost. Languages changed. Scribes devoted their labor to texts considered more essential, but another community preserved it. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church maintained the Book of Enoch in Ge'ez and accepted it within its broader biblical tradition because of this preservation. The complete work survived when most Western readers knew only fragments, references, and rumors. European interest returned during the early modern period. Travelers heard that an Ethiopian version existed. Manuscripts eventually reached Europe, and translations appeared. At first, some scholars suspected the work might be a late Ethiopian composition. Then archaeology transformed the debate. The discovery of Aramaic Enoch fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls demonstrated that major parts of the book existed in Jewish antiquity, long before medieval Ethiopian manuscripts. The Ge'ez tradition had preserved an ancient work. It had not invented one. Yet rediscovery did not settle every question. Scholars still debate how the book's sections developed, how its traditions relate to Genesis 6, and whether Semjaza and Azazel originated in separate stories. The text returned, but not as a simple answer. It returned as evidence of a more diverse ancient religious world. The Watchers were forgotten in some communities, transformed in others, and carefully preserved elsewhere. Their story survived because no single tradition controlled its fate, and now that the manuscript has returned to modern attention, one final question remains. Was its warning directed against forbidden knowledge, or against those who reveal power without accepting responsibility for what follows? The Book of Enoch gives its answer with unusual clarity. Humanity's forbidden teachers were the Watchers. Semjaza organized their descent. Azazel revealed the arts of weapons, armor, ornament, and metalworking. Other Watchers taught enchantments, roots, constellations, clouds, the sun and the moon. That is what the ancient text says. Historical evidence establishes something narrower. The Book of the Watchers circulated within ancient Judaism centuries before Christianity. Aramaic fragments found at Qumran confirm that its central traditions were not medieval inventions. The surviving manuscripts also show that the story developed through transmission, translation, and the combination of more than one narrative strand. What historians cannot establish is whether the Watchers were intended as literal celestial beings. They may have represented foreign sages, rival ritual specialists, dangerous technologies, or older mythological figures transformed within Jewish thought. Each interpretation explains part of the story. None explains every detail. The strongest evidence points not toward a forgotten historical classroom on Mount Hermon, but toward an ancient debate about power. Who should possess knowledge? Who decides when it may be revealed? And who bears responsibility after it begins to spread? In Enoch, knowledge is never neutral merely because it is useful. Metal can become a plow or a sword. Plants can become medicine or poison. The stars can guide a calendar or justify fear. Beauty can express dignity or become an instrument of manipulation. The watchers are condemned because they cross a boundary, distribute power, and refuse responsibility for the world that follows. If the story was intended literally, it preserves one of antiquity's most unsettling accounts of human civilization. If it was symbolic, its warning may be even more enduring. The danger was not that humanity learned too much. The danger was that knowledge arrived before wisdom, and power arrived before restraint. Perhaps that is why the names of the Watchers survived, not because ancient people feared learning, because they feared the teacher who opens a forbidden door, then leaves humanity alone on the other side.